Welcome crew, guys, gals, ghouls, friends, fiends, foes, whoever may be listening beyond the Omniverse tonight. I'm aboard the mothership. Secure your tinfoil hats, buckle down tight, and hold on loosely as we soar over the rocky tops of the La Platas on a rocky mountain high, get sucked into the vortex of the Four Corners, and settle down snugly at mile marker 420 in colorful Colorado. It is Sunday, February 2nd, Monday, February 3rd for those of you across the pond and beyond. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining me tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. I'm your host, TessaTNT, and we are broadcasting live from the Mile High Clubhouse tonight. If you're listening live, you may be listening to us on YouTube, Twitch, or Facebook under We Are Paradox Media. You may also watch on those servers. We're also live on KPNL Radio, which you can find at kpnlradio at kpnl-db.com. And basically anywhere you listen to your podcast. And as I said last night, we're not on some of the places that we were, but I did my homework last night, made sure that our RSS feed was on all of those locations, and it looks like everything's good. It's just Spreaker isn't carrying it anymore, so that was a relief. And I also have it to where if there's any issues on our Facebook video for YouTube, you will still get the Spreaker recording of the show, which generally tends to turn out better sometimes without less snafus. Let's see here. So tonight we have story time with me, TessaTNT. We were supposed to have Miss Amy on, but hopefully we can get that rebooked. So tonight we're going to be reading Stephen King's Insomnia, and that's been a pretty good one so far. And hopefully the sound is okay. I'm not sure, because the music is actually coming through where my microphone would be coming through, so that's odd. But we're gonna go ahead and share this with you. This is our guy with Insomnia. You guys ready? Oh yeah, and also I was going to read from the beginning of where I read last week because there was no recording, but I did find the recording on Spreaker, so you can go over there, or it should be posted up on our YouTube on We Are Paradox Media as well. Alright, let me get some things moved out here. My cell phone has been a drag, not wanting to charge, so I have to have it a certain way in order for it to do that. I don't want it to die. So we are on chapter 23, section 2. Okay, hold on, let me turn this music down just a little bit. I mean, it's good background music, but I gotta hear the story, man. He turned around in his seat and looked directly at old Dorn. Dorrance folded over the top corner of the page he was reading, closed his book, and looked back at Ralph with polite interest. They told us we weren't to go near either Ed View or dock number 3, Ralph said. He spoke slowly and with great clarity. They told us very specifically that we weren't even to think of doing that because the situation had invested both of them with great power, and we were apt to get swatted like flies. In fact, I think Lachesis said that if we tried getting near either Ed or Atropus, we might end up having a visit from one of the upper-level honchos, someone Ed calls the Crimson King. Not a very nice fellow, either, by all reports. Yes, Lois said in a faint voice. That's what they told us on the hospital roof. They said we had to convince the women in charge to cancel Susan Day's appearance. That's why we went out to High Ridge. And did you succeed in convincing them? Weiser asked. No. Its crazy friends came before we could get there, set the place on fire, and killed at least 2 of the women. Shot them. One was the woman we really wanted to talk to. Gretchen Tilbury, Ralph said. Yes, Lois agreed, but surely we don't need to do any more. I can't believe they'll go ahead with the rally now. I mean, how could they? My God, at least 4 people are dead, probably more. They'll have to cancel her speech or at least postpone it. Isn't that so? Neither Dorrance nor Joe replied. Ralph didn't reply either. He was thinking of Helen's red-rimmed, furious eyes. How can you even ask? She'd said. If they stop us now, they win. If they stop us now, they win. Was there any legal way the police could stop them? Probably not. The city council then? Maybe. Maybe they could hold a special meeting to revoke Women's Care rally permit, but would they? If there were 2,000 angry, grief-stricken women marching around the municipal building and yelling, if they stop us now, they win in unison, would the council revoke the permit? Ralph began to feel a deep, sinking sensation in his gut. Helen clearly considered tonight's rally more important than ever, and she wouldn't be the only one. It was no longer just about choice and who had the right to decide what a woman did with her body. Now it was about causes important enough to die for, and honoring the friends who had done just that. Now they were talking not just about politics, but about a kind of secular requiem, mass for the dead. Lois had grabbed his shoulder and was shaking it hard. Ralph came back to the here and now, but slowly, like a man being shaken awake in the middle of an incredibly vivid dream. Just gotta make sure my sound is working. Hold on a second. Hello, hello, hello. Yeah, it's working. Alright, sorry guys. They will cancel it, won't they? And even if they don't, if for some crazy reason they don't, most people will stay away, right? After what happened at High Ridge, they'll be afraid to come. Ralph thought about that and then shook his head. Most people will think the danger's over. The news reports are going to say that 2 of the radicals who attacked High Ridge are dead, and the 3rd is catatonic or something. But Ed, what about Ed? She cried. He's the one who got them to attack, for heaven's sake. He's the one who sent them out there in the first place. That may be true, probably is true, but how would we prove it? Do you know what I think the cops will find at wherever Charlie Pickering's been hanging his hat? A note saying it was all his idea. A note exonerating Ed completely, probably in the guise of an accusation. How Ed deserted them in their time of greatest need. And if they don't find a note like that in Charlie's rented room, they'll find it in Frank Felton's or Sandra McKay's. But that's... Lois stopped, biting at her lower lip. Then she looked at Weiser with hopeful eyes. What about Susan Day? Where is she? Does anybody know? Do you? Ralph and I will call her on the telephone and... She's already in Derry, Weiser said. Although, I doubt if the police know for sure where she is, but what I heard on the news while the old fella and I were driving out here is that the rally is going to happen tonight, and that's supposedly straight from the woman herself. Sure, thought Ralph. Sure it is. The show's going on. The show has to go on, and she knows it. Someone who's ridden the crest of the women's movement all these years, hell, since the Chicago Convention in '68, knows a genuine watershed moment when she sees it. She's evaluated the risk and found them acceptable. Either that, or she's evaluated the situation and decided that the credibility loss involved in walking away would be unacceptable. Maybe both. In any case, she's as much a prisoner of events, of a quartet, as the rest of us. They were on the outskirts of Derry again. Ralph could see the Civic Center on the horizon. Now it was old door Lois turned to. Where is she? You know? It doesn't matter how many security people she's got around her. Ralph and I can be invisible when we want to be, and we're very good at changing people's minds. Oh, changing Susan Day's mind wouldn't change anything, Doris said. He still wore that broad, maddened smile. We'll come to the Civic Center tonight no matter what. If they come and find the doors locked, they'll break them open and go inside and have the rally just the same. To show they're not afraid. Done, but can't be undone, Ralph said dully. Right, Ralph, Doris said cheerily, and patted Ralph's arm. Section 3. 5 minutes later, Joe drove his Ford past the hideous plastic statue of Paul Bunyan, which stood in front of the Civic Center, and turned in at a sign which read, "There's always free parking at your Civic Center." The acre of parking lot lay between the Civic Center building itself and the Bassey Park racetrack. If they had been at a rock concert or boat show or a wrestling card, they would have had the parking lot entirely to themselves this early, but tonight's event was clearly going to be light years from an exhibition basketball game or a monster truck pull. There were already 60 or 70 cars in the lot, and little groups of people standing around looking at the building. Most of them were women. Some had picnic hampers, several were crying, and almost all wore black armbands. Ralph saw a middle-aged woman with a weary, intelligent face and a great mass of gray hair passing these out from a carry bag. She was wearing a t-shirt with Susan Day's face on it and the words, "We shall overcome." The drive-thru area in front of the Civic Center's bank of entrance doors was even busier than the parking lot. No fewer than 6 TV news vans were parked there, and various tech crews stood under the triangular cement canopy in little clusters, discussing how they were going to handle tonight's event. And according to the bedsheet banner, which hung below from the canopy, flapping lazily in the breeze, there was going to be an event. "Rally is on," it read in large, blurry, spray paint letters. 8 p.m., come show your solidarity, express your outrage, comfort your sisters. Joe put the Ford in park, then turned to old door, eyebrows raised. The door nodded, and Joe looked at Ralph. "I guess this is where you and Lois get out, Ralph? Good luck. I'd come with you if I could. I even asked him, but he says I'm not equipped." "That's all right," Ralph said. "We appreciate everything you've done, don't we, Lois?" "We certainly do," Lois said. Ralph reached for the door handle, then let it go again. He turned to face Dorrance. "What's this about, really? I mean, it's not about saving the 2,000 or so Clotho and Lucchesi said are going to be there tonight, that's for sure. To the kind of all-time forces they talked about, 2,000 lives are probably just a little more grease on the bearings. So what's it all about, Ralphie? Why are we here?" Lawrence's grin had faded at last. With it gone, he looked younger and strangely formidable. "I've asked God the same question," he said. "Ain't got no answer. You're not going to get one either, but I'll tell you this much. You've become the pivot point of great events and vast forces. The work of the higher universe has almost completely come to a stop, as those of both the random and the purpose turn to mark your progress." "That's great, but I don't get it," Ralph said, more in resignation than in anger. "Neither do I, but those 2,000 lives are enough for me," Lois said quietly. "I could never live with myself if I didn't at least try to stop what's going to happen. I dream of the death bag around that building for the rest of my life. Even if I only got an hour's sleep at night, I'd dream of it." Ralph considered this, then nodded. He opened his door and swung one foot out. "That's a good point, and Helen will be there. She might even bring Nat, maybe for little short-time farts like us. That's enough. And maybe, he thought, we'll want a rematch with Doc number 3. Oh, Ralph, Carolyn warned. Eastwood again? No, not Clint Eastwood, not Sylvester Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger either. Not even John Wayne. He was no big action hero or movie star. He was just plain old Ralph Roberts from Harris Avenue. That didn't make the grudge he bore the Doc with the rusty scalpel any less real, however. And now that grudge was a lot bigger than just a stray dog and a retired history teacher who had lived downstairs for the last 10 years or so. Ralph kept thinking of the parlor at High Ridge and the women propped against the wall below the poster of Susan Day. It wasn't upon Marilee's pregnant belly which the eye in his mind kept focusing, but Gretchen Tilbury's hair. Her beautiful blonde hair that had been mostly burned off by the close-range rifle shot that had taken her life. Charlie Pickering had pulled the trigger and maybe Ed Mew had put the gun in his hands, but it was Atropos, Ralph blamed. Atropos, the jump rope thief. Atropos, the hat thief. Atropos, the cone thief. Atropos, the earring thief. Come on, Lois, he said. Let's... But she put her hand on his arm and shook her head. Not just yet. Get back in here and shut the door. He looked at her carefully, then did what she said. She paused, gathering her thoughts, and when she spoke, she looked directly at Old Door. I still don't understand why we were sent out to High Ridge, she said. They never even came right out and said that was where we were supposed to be and what we were supposed to do, but we know, don't we, Ralph? That was what they really wanted from us, and I want to understand if we're supposed to be here. Why did we have to go out there? I mean, we saved some lives, and I'm glad, but I think Ralph's right. A few lives don't mean much to the people running the show. Silence for a moment, and then Dorrance said, Did Clotho and Lachesis really strike you as all-wise and all-knowing, Lois? Well, they were smart, but I guess they weren't exactly geniuses, she said after a moment's thought. At one point, they called themselves Working Joes, who were a long way down the ladder from the broadroom executives who actually made the decisions. Old Door was nodding and smiling. Clotho and Lachesis are almost short-timers themselves in the big scheme of things. They have their own fears and mental blind spots. They're also capable of making bad decisions, but in the end, that doesn't matter because they also serve the purpose in TET. They thought we'd lose if we went head-to-head with Atropos, didn't they? Ralph asked. That's why they talked themselves into believing we could accomplish what they wanted by using the back door. The back door being High Ridge. Yes, Dor said. That's it. Great, Ralph said. I love a vote of confidence, especially when... No, Dor said, that's not it. Ralph and Lois exchanged a bewildered glance. Bill McGovern had liked to call our Lois. I'll be darned. What's she doing here? Oh, hold on. I think I skipped a page. Yep, I did. What are you talking about? It's both things at the same time. That's very often the way things are within the purpose. You see, well, he sighed. I hate all these questions. I hardly ever answer questions. Did I tell you that? Yes, Lois said. You did. Yes, and now bingo, all these questions. Nasty and useless. Ralph looked at Lois and she looked back at him. Neither of them made any move to get out. Nor heaved a sigh. All right, but this is the last thing I'm going to say, so pay attention. Clotho and Lachesis may have sent you to High Ridge for the wrong reasons, but the purpose sent you there for the right ones. You fulfilled your task there by saving the women, Lois said, but Dorrance was shaking his head. Then what did we do? She nearly shouted. What? Don't we have a right to know what part of this gosh damn purpose we fulfilled? No, Dorrance said. At least not yet, because you have to do it again. This is crazy, Ralph said. It isn't, though, Dorrance replied. He was holding forward love tightly against his chest now, bending it back and forth, and looking at Ralph earnestly. Random is crazy. Purpose is sane. All right, Ralph thought. What did we do at High Ridge besides save the people in the cellar? And John Lydecker, of course. I think Pickering might have killed him as well as Chris Neal if I hadn't intervened. Could be something to do with Lydecker. He supposed it could, but it didn't feel right. Dorrance, he said, can you please give us a little more information? I mean... No, old Dora said. Not unkindly, no more questions, no more time. We'll have a good meal together after this is over. If we're still around, that is. You really know how to cheer a fellow up, Dora. Ralph opened his door. Lois did the same, and they both stepped out into the parking lot. He bent down and looked at Joe Weiser. Is there anything else? Anything you can think of? No, I don't think. Thor leaned forward and whispered in his ear. Joe listened, frowning. Well, Ralph asked when Dorrance sat back. What did he say? He said not to forget my comb, Joe said. I don't have the slightest idea what he's talking about, but what else is new? That's okay, Ralph said, and smiled a little. That's one of the few things that I do understand. Come on, Lois, let's check out the crowd. Mingle a little. Section 4. Halfway across the parking lot, she elbowed him so hard in the side that Ralph staggered. Look, she whispered. Right over there. Isn't that Connie Chung? Ralph looked. Yes, the woman in the beige coat standing between two techs with the CBS logo on their jackets was almost certainly Connie Chung. He had admired her pretty, intelligent face and pleasant smile over too many evening meals to have much doubt about it. Either her or her twin sister, he said. Lois seemed to have forgotten all about Old Door and High Ridge and the Bald Docks. In that moment, she was once more the woman Bill McGovern who liked to call our Lois. I'll be darned, what's she doing here? Well, Ralph began, and then covered his mouth to hide a jaw-cracking yawn. I guess what's going on in Derry is national news now. She must be here to do a live segment in front of the Civic Center for tonight's news, in any case. Suddenly, with no warning at all, the auras swam back. Ralph gasped. Jesus, Lois, are you seeing this? But he didn't think she was. If she had been, Ralph didn't think Connie Chung would have rated even an honorable mention on Lois's attention roster. This was horrible, almost beyond conceiving, and for the first time Ralph fully realized that even the bright world of auras had its dark side. One that would make an ordinary person fall on his knees and thank God for his reduced perceptions. And this isn't even stepping up the ladder, he thought. At least I don't think it is. I'm only looking at it with the wider world like a man looking through a window, and not actually in it. Nor did he want to be in it. Just looking at something like this was almost enough to make you wish you were blind. Lois was frowning at him with the colors. No. Should I try to? Is there something wrong with them? He tried to answer and couldn't. A moment later, he felt her hand seize his arm in a painful pincher's grip above the elbow and knew that no explanation was necessary. For better or worse, Lois was now seeing for herself. Oh dear, she whimpered in a breathless little voice that teetered on the edge of tears. Oh dear, oh dear, oh jeez, Lois. In the roof of Derry home, the aura hanging over the Civic Center had looked like a vast, saggy umbrella. The Travelers Insurance Company logo colored black by a child's crayon, perhaps, Standing here in the parking lot was like being inside a large, indescribably nasty mosquito net. But so old and badly cared for that its gauzy walls had silted up with blackish green mildew. The bright October sun shrank to a blurry circle of tarnished silver. The air took on a gloomy, foggy cast that made Ralph think of pictures of London at the end of the 19th century. They were not just looking at the Civic Center deathbed, but not anymore. They were buried alive in it. Ralph could feel it pressing hungrily in on him, trying to overwhelm him with feelings of loss and despair and dismay. Why bother, he asked himself, watching apathetically as Joe Weiser's Ford drove back down toward Main Street with Old Door still sitting in the back seat. I mean, hey, really, what the hell is the use? We can't change this thing the way we can. Maybe we did something out at High Ridge, but the difference between what was going on out there and what's happening here is like the difference between a smudge and a black hole. If we try to mess in with this business, we're going to get flattened. He heard moaning from beside him and realized Lois was crying. Mustering his flagging energy, he slid an arm around her shoulders. Hold on, Lois, he said. We can stand up to this. But he wondered. We're breathing it in, she wept. It's like we're sucking up death. Oh, Ralph, let's get away from here, please. Let's just get away from here. The idea sounded as good to him as the idea of water must sound to a man dying of thirst in the desert, but he shook his head. 2,000 people are going to die here tonight if we don't do something. I'm pretty confused about the rest of this business, but that much I can grasp with no trouble at all. Okay, she whispered. Just keep your arm around me so I don't crack my head open if I faint. It was ironic, Ralph thought. They now had the faces and bodies of people in the early years of vigorous middle age. But they shuffled across the parking lot like a pair of old-timers whose muscles have turned to string and whose bones have turned to glass. He could hear Lois's breathing, rapid and labored, like the breathing of a woman who has just sustained some serious injury. I'll take you back if you want, Ralph said, and he meant it. He would take her back to the parking lot. He would take her to the orange bus stop bench he could see from here. And when the bus came, getting on and back to Harrison Avenue would be the simplest thing in the world. He could feel the killer aura which surrounded this place pressing in on him, trying to smother him like a plastic dry cleaning bag. And he found himself remembering something the governor had said about Mayloker's emphysema. That it was one of those diseases that keep on giving. And now he supposed he had a pretty good idea of how May Loker had felt during her last few years. It didn't matter how hard he sucked at the black air or how deep he dragged it down. It did not satisfy. His heart and head went on pounding, making him feel as if he were suffering the worst hangover of his life. He was opening his mouth to repeat that he'd take her back when she spoke up, talking in little, out-of-breath gasps. I guess I can make it. I hope. It won't take long. Ralph, how come we can feel something this bad even without being able to see the colors? Why can't they? She pointed at the media people milling around the Civic Center. Were we short-timers that insensitive? I hate to think that. He shook his head, indicating that he didn't know, but he thought that perhaps the news crew, video technicians, and the security guards clustered around the doors and beneath the spray-painted banner hanging from the canopy did feel something. He saw lots of hands holding styrofoam cups of coffee, but he didn't see anyone actually drinking the stuff. There was a box of donuts sitting on the hood of a station wagon, but the only one which had taken out had been laid aside on a napkin with just a single bite gone. Ralph ran his eye over 24 faces without seeing a single smile. These people were going about their work, setting camera angles, marking locations from which the talking heads would do their stand-ups, laying down coaxial cable and duct taping it to the cement, but they were doing it without the sort of excitement which Ralph would have expected to accompany a story as big as this one has been turning out to be. Connie Chung walked out from beneath the canopy with a bearded, handsome cameraman. Michael Rosenberg, the tag on the CBS jacket said, and then raised her small hands in a threatening gesture showing him how she wanted him to shoot the bedsheet banner hanging down from the canopy. Rosenberg nodded. Chung's face was pale and solemn, and at one point during her conversation with the bearded cameraman, Ralph saw her pause and raise a hand uncertainly to her temple, as if she had lost her train of thought or perhaps felt faint. There seemed to be an underlying similarity to all the expressions he saw, a common chord, and he thought he knew what it was. They were all suffering from what had been called melancholia when he was a kid, and melancholia was just a fancy word for the blues. Ralph found himself remembering times in his life when he'd hit the emotional equivalent of a cold spot while swimming or clear air turbulence while flying. You'd be cruising along through your day, sometimes feeling great, sometimes just feeling okay, but getting along and getting it done. And then, for no apparent reason at all, you go down in flames and crash. A sense of what the hell's the use would slide over you, unconnected to any real event in your life at that moment, but incredibly powerful all the same. And you felt like simply creeping back to bed and pulling the covers up over your head. Maybe this is what causes feelings like that, he thought. Maybe it's running into something like this. Some big mess of death or sorrow waiting to happen. Spread out like a banquet tent, made of cobwebs and tears instead of canvas and rope. We don't see it, not down on our short time level, but we feel it. Oh yes, we feel it, and now it was trying to suck them dry. Maybe they weren't vampires as they both had feared, but this thing was. This bag had a sluggish, half-sentient life, and it would suck them dry if it could, if they let it. Noah stumbled against him, and Ralph had all he could do to keep them both from sprawling to the pavement. Then she lifted her head slowly as if her hair had been dipped in cement, curled a hand around her mouth, and inhaled sharply. At the same time, she flickered a little. Under other circumstances, Ralph might have dismissed that flicker as a momentary glitch in his own eyes, but not now. She had slid up, just a little, just enough to feed. He hadn't seen Lois dip into the waitress's aura, but this time everything happened in front of him. The auras of the news people were like small but brightly colored Japanese lanterns glowing bravely in the vast, gloomy cavern. Now a tight beam of violet light speared out from one of them. Michael Rosenberg, Connie Chung's bearded cameraman, in fact, divided into an inch or so in front of Lois's face. The upper branch divided in two again and slipped into her nostrils. The lower branch went between her parted lips and into her mouth. He could see it glowing faintly behind her cheeks, lighting her from the inside as a candle lights a jack-o'-lantern. Her grip on him loosened, and suddenly the lingering pressure of her weight was gone. A moment later, the violet beam of light disappeared. She looked around at him. Color, not a lot but some, was returning to her leaden cheeks. That's better. A lot better. Now you, Ralph. He was reluctant. It still felt like stealing, but it had to be done if he didn't want to simply collapse right here. He could almost feel the last of Nirvana Boy's borrowed energy running out through his pores. He curled his hand around his mouth, now as he had in the Dunkin' Donuts parking lot that morning, and turned slightly to his left, seeking a target. Connie Chung backed several steps closer to them. She was still looking up at the bedsheet banner hanging from the canopy and talking to Rosenberg, who seemed none the worse for wear as a result of Lois's borrowing about it. With no further thought, Ralph inhaled sharply through the curled tube of his fingers. Chung's aura was the same lovely shade of wedding-gown ivory as those which had surrounded Helen and Nat on the day they'd come to his apartment with Gretchen Tilbury. Instead of a ray of light, something like a long straight ribbon shot from Chung's aura. Ralph felt strength begin to fill him almost at once, banishing the aching weariness in his joints and muscles. And he could think clearly again, as if a big cloud of sludge had just been washed out of his brain. Connie Chung broke off, looked up at the sky for a moment, then began to talk to the cameraman again. Ralph glanced around and saw Lois looking at him anxiously. "Any better?" she whispered. "All kinds," he said, "but it's like being zipped up in a body bag." "I think," Lois began, and then her eyes fixed on something to the left of the Civic Center doors. She screamed and shrank back against Ralph, her eyes so wide it seemed they must tumble from her sockets. He followed her gaze and felt his breath stop in his throat. The planners had tried to soften the building's plain brick sides by planting evergreen bushes along them. These had neither been neglected or purposely allowed to grow until they interlaced and threatened to entirely hide the narrow strip of grass between them and the concrete walk which bordered the drive-through. Giant bugs that looked like prehistoric trilobites were squirming in and out of those evergreens in droves, crawling over each other, bumping heads, sometimes rearing up and pawing each other with their front legs like stags locking horns during mating season. They weren't transparent like the bird on the satellite dish, but there was something ghostly and unreal about them just the same. Their oars flickered feverishly and brainlessly, Ralph guessed, through a whole spectrum of colors. They were so bright and yet so ephemeral that it was almost possible to think of them as weird lightning bugs. Except that's not what they are. You know what they are. "Hey!" It was Rosenberg, Chung's cameraman, who held them, but most of the others in front of the building were looking. "She okay, bud?" "Yes," Ralph called back. He still had his hand curled around his mouth and lowered it quickly, feeling foolish. I saw a mouse," Lois called, smiling a Daffy Days smile. And our Lois smile, if Ralph had ever seen one, was very proud of her. She pointed toward the evergreen shrugs to the left of the door with a finger that was almost steady. "He went right in there. Gosh, but he was a fat one. Did you see him, Nora?" "No, Alice." "Stick around, lady," Michael Rosenberg called. "You'll see all kinds of wildlife here tonight." There was some sultry, almost forced laughter, and then they turned back to their tasks. "Rod, Ralph," Lois whispered. Those things." He took her hand and squeezed it. "Steady, Lois." "They know, don't they? That's why they're here. They're like vultures." Ralph nodded as he watched several bugs emerge from the tops of the bushes and began to ooze aimlessly up the wall. They moved with dazed sluggishness, like flies buzzing against a window pane in November, and left slimy trails of color behind them. These quickly dimmed and faded. Other bugs crawled out from beneath the bushes and onto the small strip of lawn. One of the local news commentators began strolling toward this infested area, and when he turned his head, Ralph saw it was John Kirkland. He was talking to a good-looking woman dressed in one of those power-look business outfits, which Ralph found, under normal circumstances anyway, extremely sexy. He guessed that she was Kirkland's producer and wondered if Lisette Benson's aura turned green when this woman was around. "They're going toward those bugs," Lois whispered fiercely at him. "We have to stop them, Ralph. We have to. We're not going to do a damn thing, but, Lois, we can't start raving about bugs nobody but us can see. We'll end up in the nuthatch, if we do. Besides, the bugs aren't there for them." He paused and added, "I hope." They watched as Kirkland and his good-looking colleague walked onto the lawn, and into a jelly-like knot of the twitching, crawling trilobites. One slid onto Kirkland's highly polished loafer. paused until he stopped moving for a second, then climbed onto his pants leg. I don't give much of a shit about Susan Day one way or the other, Kirkland was saying. Woman's care is the story here, not her. Crying babes wearing black armbands. Watch out, John, the woman said dryly. Your sensitivity is shown. Is it? Goddamn. The bug on his pants leg appeared bound for his crotch. It occurred to Ralph that if Kirkland were suddenly given the power to see what was shortly going to be crawling over his balls, it would probably go right out of his mind. Okay, but be sure to talk to the women who run the local power network, the producer was saying. Now that Tilbury's dead, the ones that matter are Maggie Petrowski, Barbara Richards, and Dr. Roberta Harper. Harper's going to introduce the big kahuna tonight, I think. Or maybe in this case, it's the big kahunite. The woman took a step off the sidewalk, and one of her high heels skewered the lumbering colored bug. A rainbow of guts spewed out of it, and the waxy white substance that looked like stale mashed potatoes. Ralph had an idea. The white stuff had been eggs. Ew, what a grody picture. Lois pressed her face against his arm. Keep your eyes open for a lady named Helen DePnew, the producer said, taking a step closer to the building. The bug stuck on the heel of her shoe, flopped and twisted as she walked. DePnew? Kirkland said. He tapped his knuckles against his brow. Somewhere deep inside, a bell is ringing. Nah, it's just your last active brain cell rolling around in there, the producer said. She's Ed DePnew's wife. They're separated. If you want tears, she's your best bet. She and Tilbury were good friends. Maybe special friends, if you know what I mean. Kirkland leered, an expression so foreign to his camera persona that Ralph felt slightly disoriented. One of the color bugs, meanwhile, had found its way onto the toe of the woman's shoe and was working its way up her leg. Ralph watched in helpless fascination as it disappeared beneath the hem of her skirt. Watching the moving bump climb her thigh was like watching a kitten under a bathtub. And again it seemed that Kirkland's colleague felt something as she talked to him about interviews during today's speech. She reached down and absently scratched at the lump, which had now made it almost all the way up to her right hip. Ralph didn't hear the thick popping sound the fragile, flabby thing made when it burst, but he could imagine it. It was less helpless not to, it seemed, and he could imagine its innards dripping down her nylon leg like pus. It would remain there at least until her evening shower, unseen, unfelt, and unsuspected. Now the two of them began discussing how they should cover the scheduled pro-life rally this afternoon. Assuming it actually happened, that was. The woman was of the opinion that not even the Friends of Life would be dumbheaded enough to show up at the Civic Center after what had happened at High Ridge. Kirkland told her that it was impossible to underestimate the idiocy of fanatics. People who could wear that much polyester in public were clearly a force to be reckoned with. And all the time they were talking, exchanging quips and ideas and gossip, more of the swollen, multicolored bugs were swarming busily at their legs and torsos. One pioneer had made it all the way up to Kirkland's red tie and was apparently bound for his face. Movement off to the right caught Ralph's eye. He turned toward the doors in time to see one of the techs elbowing a buddy and pointing at him and Lois. Ralph suddenly had an all-too-clear picture of what they were seeing. Two people with no visible reason for being here. Neither of them was wearing a black armband, and they were clearly not representatives of the media. Just hanging out at the edge of the parking lot, the lady, who had already screamed once, had her face buried against the gentleman's arm, and the gentleman in question was gaping like a fool at nothing in particular. Ralph spoke softly and from the corner of his mouth like an inmate discussing escape in an old Warner Brothers jailbreak epic. Get your head up. We're attracting more attention than we can afford. For a moment, he really didn't believe she was going to be able to do that, and then she came through and lifted her head. She glanced at the shrubs growing along the wall one final time. An involuntary, horrified little peek, and then looked resolutely back at Ralph, and only Ralph. Do you see any sign of atropus, Ralph? That is why we're here, isn't it? To pick up his trail? Maybe, I suppose. I haven't even looked to tell the truth. Too many other things going on. I think we ought to get a closer look to the building. This wasn't a thing he wanted to do, but it seemed very important to do something. He could feel the death bag all around them, a gloomy, suffocating presence that was passively opposed to forward motion of any kind. That was what they had to fight. "All right," she said. "I'm going to ask for Connie Chung's autograph, and I'm going to be all giggly and silly while I do it. Can you understand that?" "Yes." "Good, because that will mean that if they're looking at anybody, they'll be looking at me." "Sounds good." He spared one last look at John Kirkland and the woman producer. They were now discussing what events might cause them to break into the evening's network feed and go live, totally unaware of the lumbering trilobites crawling back and forth on their faces. One of them was currently squirming slowly into John Kirkland's mouth. Ralph looked away in a hurry and let Lois pull him over to where Miss Chung stood with Rosenberg, the bearded cameraman. He saw the two of them glance first at Lois and then at each other. The shared look was 1 part amusement and 3 parts resignation. "Here comes one of them," and then Lois gave his hand a hard little squeeze that said, "Never mind me, Ralph. You take care of your business, and I'll take care of mine." "Pardon me, but aren't you Connie Chung?" Lois asked in her gushiest, "isn't this the living end" voice. "I saw you over there, and at first I said to Norton, 'Is that the lady who's on with Dan Rather, or am I crazy?' And then, 'I am Connie Chung, and it's very nice to meet you. But I'm getting ready for tonight's news, so if you could excuse me.' Oh, of course, I wouldn't dream of bothering you. I only want an autograph. Just a quick little scribble would do, because I'm your #1 fan, at least in name." Mrs. Chung glanced at Rosenberg. He was already holding a pen out in one hand, much as a good OR nurse has the instrument to the doctor's will, not next even before he calls for it. Ralph turned his attention to the area in front of the Civic Center and slid his perceptions up the tiniest bit. What he saw in front of the doors was a semi-transparent, blackish substance that puzzled him at first. It was about 2 inches deep and looked almost like some sort of geological formation. That couldn't be, though, could it? If what he was looking at was real, the way objects in short-time world were real at least, the stuff would block the doors from opening, and it wasn't doing that. As Ralph watched, 2 TV techs stroll ankle-deep through the stuff as if it were no more substantial than low-lying ground mist. Ralph remembered the oral footprints people left behind, the ones that looked like Arthur Murray learned to dance diagrams and suddenly thought he understood. The tracks faded away like cigarette smoke, except that cigarette smoke really didn't go away. It left a residue on walls, on windows, and in lungs. Apparently, human auras left their own residue. It probably wasn't enough to see once the colors faded, if it was only one person, but this was the biggest public meeting place in Maine's 4th largest city. Ralph thought of all the people who had poured in and out through these doors. All the banquets, conventions, coin shows, concerts, basketball tourneys, and understood that semi-transparent slag was the equivalent of the slight dip you sometimes saw in the middle of much-used steps. "Never mind that now, sweetheart. Take care of your business." Nearby, Connie Chung was scribbling her name on the back of Lois's light bill for September. Ralph looked at the slidey residue on the cement apron in front of the doors, hunting for a trace of atropus, something which might register more as smell than sight. Nasty, meaty aroma, like the alley which used to run behind Mr. Huston's butcher shop when Ralph was a kid. "Thank you," Lois was blurbing. "I said to Norton, she looks just like she does on TV. Just like a little China doll. Those were my exact words." "Very welcome, I'm sure," Chung said, "but I really have to get back to work." "Of course you. Say hello to Dan Rather for me, won't you? Tell him I said courage." "I certainly will." Chung smiled and nodded as she handed the pen back to Rosenberg. "Now, if you'll excuse us." "If it's here, it's higher up than I am," Ralph thought. I'll have to slide up a little bit farther. Yes, but he'd have to be careful, and not just because time had become an extremely valuable commodity. The simple fact was that if he went up too high, he would disappear from the short-time world. And that was a sort of occurrence which might even distract these news people from the impending pro-choice rally, at least for a while. Ralph concentrated, but when the painless spasm inside his head happened this time, it didn't come as a blink but as a soft lowering of a lash. Color bloomed silently into the world. Everything stood forth with exclamatory brilliance. Yet the strongest of these colors, the oppressive key chord, was the black of the deathbed. And it was a negotiation of all others. Depression and that sense of debilitating weakness fell on him again, sinking into his heart like the pointed ends of a claw hammer. He realized that if he had business to do up here, he had better do it quickly and scoot back down to the short-time level before he was stripped clean of life force. He looked at the doors again. For a moment there was still nothing but the faded auras of short-timers like himself. And then what he was looking for suddenly came clear, rising into his view as a message which has been written in lemon juice rises on sight when it is held close to a candle flame. He had expected something which would look and smell like rotting guts in the bins behind Mr. Hudson's knacker shop. But the reality was even worse, possibly because it was so unexpected. There were fans of a bloody, mucousy substance on the doors themselves. Marks made by octopuses, restless fingers perhaps, and a revoltingly large puddle of the same stuff sinking into the hardened residue in front of the doors. There was something so terrible about this stuff, so alien, that it made the color bugs look almost normal by comparison. It was like a pool of vomit left by a dog suffering from some new and dangerous strain of rabies. The trail of this stuff led away from the puddle first in drying clots and splashes, then in smaller drips like spilled paint. Of course, Ralph thought. That's why we have to come here. The little bastard can't stay away from the place. It's like cocaine to a dope addict. You can imagine Atropos standing right here where Ralph was standing now, looking, grinning, then stepping forward and putting his hand on the doors, caressing them, creating those filthy, filmy marks. You can imagine Atropos drawing strength and energy from the very blackness which was robbing Ralph of his own vitality. He has other places to go and other things to do, of course. Every day is undoubtedly a busy day when you're a supernatural psycho like him, but it must be hard for him to stay away from this place for long, no matter how busy he is. And how does it make him feel? Like a tight fuck on a summer afternoon? That's how. Lois tucked his sleeve from behind and he turned to her. She was still smiling, but the feverish intensity in her eyes made the expression on her lips look suspiciously like scream. Behind her, Connie Chung and Rosenberg were strolling back toward the building. "You've got to get me out of here," Lois whispered. "I can't stand it anymore. I feel like I'm losing my mind." "Okay, no problem. I can't hear you, Ralph, and I think I can see the sun shining through you. Jesus, I'm sure I can." "Well, wait." He concentrated and felt the world slide slightly around him. The colors faded. Lois's aura seemed to disappear back inside her skin. Better? Well, solider anyway. He smiled briefly. "Good, come on." He took her by the elbow and began guiding her back toward where Joe Weiser had dropped them off. It was the same direction in which the bloody splashes led. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "Yes." She brightened at once. "But that's great. I saw you go up, you know. It was very odd, like watching you turn into a sepia-tone photograph and then thinking I could see the sun shining through you. That was very peculiar." She looked at him severely. "Bad, huh?" "No, not bad exactly, just peculiar. Those bugs now, they were bad. Ugh." "I know what you mean, but I think they're all back there." "Maybe, but we're still a long way from being out of the woods, aren't we?" "Yeah, a long way from Eden," Carol would have said. "Just stick with me, Ralph Roberts, and don't get lost." Ralph Roberts? Never heard of him. Norton's the name. And that, he was happy to see, made her laugh. All right, we're at chapter 24, and we're also at our first music break. So on this break, we have the lovely and talented Miss Mia Savage with her band Antidote for Savages, and she is located in the Phoenix, Arizona area. Sometimes she's up here in Bayfield, but hasn't been for a while. She's going to be singing Your Skeleton, or New Reality, Let Me Be Your Home, and Lemire and Crypto. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
That I could take it, no matter how I
Welcome back, and thanks so much for joining me tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Tonight, we've had story time with me, TessaTNT, and we've been getting into Stephen King's book, Insomnia, and we have actually made it to chapter 24. So, luckily I didn't have to restart from last week's reading, and you can catch that either on StreamYard, actually Spreaker, under We Are Paradox Media, or YouTube under We Are Paradox Media, and you shall find it there. Unfortunately, internet issues, Century stinks, so we got cut off last week as far as YouTube and everything. But yeah, let us continue. Section 1, Chapter 24. They slowly walked across the asphalt parking lot with its gridwork of spray-painted yellow lines. Tonight, Ralph knew most of these spaces would be filled. Come, look, listen, be seen, and, most important, show your city and a whole watching country beyond it that you cannot be intimidated by Charlie Pickerings of the world. Even the minority kept away by fear would be replaced by the morbidly curious. As they approached the racetrack, they also approached the edge of the death bag. It was thicker here, and Ralph could see slow, swirling movement, as if the death bag were made up of tiny specks of charred matter. It looked a bit like the air oven, an open incinerator shimmering with heat and fragments of burnt paper. And he could hear two sounds, one overlaying the other. The top one was a silvery sighing. The wind might make a sound like that, Ralph thought, if it learned how to weep. It was a creepy sound, but the one beneath it was actively unpleasant. A slobbery chewing noise, as if a gigantic toothless mouth were ingesting large amounts of soft food somewhere close by. Anyway, Plane, we'll go ahead and share the link there if you would. Lois stopped as they approached the death bag's dark, particle-flecked skin and turned frightened, apologetic eyes up to Ralph. When she spoke, it was in a little girl's voice. "I don't think I can go through that." She paused, struggled, and at last brought out the rest. "It's alive, you know. The whole thing. It sees him." Lois jerked a thumb back over her shoulder to indicate both people in the parking lot and the news crews closer into the building. And that's bad, but it also sees us, and that's worse because it knows that we see it. It doesn't like being seen. Felt maybe, but not seen. Now the lower-pitched sound, the slobbery eating sound, seemed almost to be articulating words, and the longer Ralph listened, the more sure he became that that was actually the case. "Wolf, beat it!" "Ralph?" Lois whispered. "Do you hear it?" "It you, kill you, eat you." He nodded and took her by the elbow again. "Come on, Lois." "Come? Where?" "Down, all the way." For a moment she only looked at him, not understanding. Then the light dawned and she nodded. Ralph felt the blink happen inside him, a little stronger than the eyelash flutter of a few moments ago. And suddenly the day around him cleared. The swirling, smoggy barrier ahead of them melted away and was gone. Nevertheless, they closed their eyes and held their breath as they approached the place where they knew the edge of the death bag lay. Ralph felt Lois's hand tighten on his as she hurried through the invisible barrier, and as he passed through himself, a dark note of tangled memories, the slow death of his wife, the loss of a favorite dog as a child, the sight of Bill McGovern leaning over with one hand pressed against his chest, seemed to first lightly surround his mind and then clamp down on it like a cruel hand. His ears filled with that silvery sobbing sound, so constant and so chillingly vacuous, the weeping voice of a congenital idiot. Then they were through. Section 2. As soon as they had passed beneath the wooden arch on the far side of the parking lot, "We're off to the races at Basie Park," was printed along its curb. Ralph drew Lois over to a bench and made her sit down, although she insisted vehemently that she was just fine. "Good, but I need a second or two to get myself back together." She brushed a lock of hair off his temple and planted a gentle kiss in the hollow beneath. "Take all the time you need, dear heart." That turned out to be about 5 minutes, when he felt reasonably confident that he could stand up without coming unlocked at the knees. Ralph took her hand again, and they stood up together. "Did you find it, Ralph? Did you find his trail?" "Let me make sure this is on Geddes." He nodded. "In order to see it, we have to go up about 2 jumps. I tried going up just enough to see the auras at first, because that doesn't seem to speed everything up, but it didn't work. It has to be a little more than that." "All right, but we have to be careful, because when we can see, we can be seen. Yes, we can't lose track of the time either." "Absolutely not. Are you ready?" "Almost. I think I need another kiss first. Just a little one will do." Smiling, he gave it to her. "Now I'm ready." "Okay, well, here we go." Blink. Section 3. The reddish splotches of spore led them across the packed popular area where the Midway stood during County Fair week. Then the racetrack where the Pacers ran from May to September. Lois stood at the chest-high slat fence for a moment, glanced around to make sure the grandstand was empty, and then boosted herself up. She moved with the sweet litheness of a young girl at first, but once she had swung a leg over the top and straddled the fence, she paused. On her face was an expression of mingled surprise and dismay. "Lois, are you alright?" "Yes, fine. It's my darn old underwear, I guess. I've lost weight because it just won't stay where it belongs, for goodness sakes." Oh no. Hold on. Okay, I gotta message this to my fam. I guess they're trying to order pizza in town. Shoot. Well, at least my... hold on. 3, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I just gotta see what the other one is. 3, 9. Yeah. Alright, sorry guys. Ralph realized he could see not just the frilly hem of Lois's slit, but 3 or 4 inches of pink nylon. Brown chicken brown cow. He stifled a grin as she sat astride the broad plank top of the fence, yanking at the fabric. He thought of telling her she looked cuter than kitten britches and decided that might not be such a good idea. "Turn your back while I get this damn slip fixed, Ralph, and wipe that smirk off your face while you're at it." He turned his back on her and looked at the Civic Center. If there had been a smirk on his face, he thought it more likely that she had seen one in his aura. The sight of that dark, slowly swirling death bag took care of it in a hurry. "Lois, you might be happier if you just took it off." "Pardon me, fall to heck and back, Ralph Roberts, but I wasn't raised to take off my underwear and leave it lying around on racetracks. And if you ever knew a girl who did do things like that, I hope it was before you met Carolyn. I only wish I had a..." vague image of a gleaming steel safety pin in Ralph's head. "I don't suppose you have one, do you, Ralph?" He shook his head and sent back an image of his own, sand running through an hourglass. All right, I get the message. I think I've fixed it so that'll hold together at least a little longer. You can turn around now." Oh, snap. The crack. Uh-oh. What?
So, I cannot. And I see spiders joking around, and so I was like, "Floyd, you want to play Roblox?" But I had voice crack, and I was like, "Now," and I just keep on screaming at him like that, and I can't breathe.
Well, trying to do your show, so.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Okay, bye.
Good loud. Sorry, guys. Everything's flying at me all at once. Okay, here we go. Okay, he did. She was letting herself down on the other side of the board fence and doing it with easy confidence, but Her aura had held considerably, and Ralph could see dark circles under her eyes again. The revolt of the Foundation garments had been quelled, however, at least for the time being. Ralph boosted himself up, swung a leg over the fence, and then dropped down on the other side. He liked the way doing it felt. It seemed to wake old long memories in his bones. Going to need to power up again before long, Lois. Lois nodded early. I know. Come on, let's go. They followed the trail across the racetrack, climbed aboard the fence on the other side, then descended a brushy, overgrown slope to Newbolt Street. Ralph saw Lois grimly holding her slip up through the skirt of her dress as they struggled down the hill. Thought again about asking if she wouldn't be happier just ditching the damn thing, and decided again to mind his own business. If it became enough of a problem to her, she would do it without any further advice on the subject for him. Ralph's greatest worry that after this trail would simply peter out on him initially proved groundless. The dim pink blotches led directly down the crumbling, patching surface of Newbolt Street, between paintless tenements that should have been demolished years ago. Tattered laundry flapped on sagging lines. Buried children with snotty noses watched them pass from rusty front yards. A beautiful tow-headed boy of about 3 gave Ralph and Lois a deeply suspicious look from his front step, then grabbed his crotch with one hand and used the other to flash them the bird. Newbolt Street dead-ended at the old train yards, and here Ralph and Lois momentarily lost the track. They stood by one of the sawhorses blocking off an ancient rectangular cellar hole, all that remained of the old passenger depot, and looked around in a big semicircle of waste ground. Rusty red siding tracks glowered from deep within tangles of sunflowers and thorny weeds. Shards from 100 broken bottles twinkled in the afternoon sun. Spray painted in hot pink letters across the splintery side of an old diesel shed were the words, "Susie sucked my big fat one." This sentimental declaration stood within a border of dancing swastikas. Ralph. Where the hell did it go? Down there, Ralph, see? She was pointing along what had been the main line until 1963. The only line until 1983, and was now just another pair of rusty, overgrown steel tracks on the way to nowhere. Even most of the ties were gone, burned as evening campfires either by local winos or by vags passing through on their way to the potato fields of Aroostook County, or the apple orchards and fishing smacks of the Maritimes. On one of the few remaining cross ties, Ralph saw splashes of pink spore. They looked fresher than the ones they had followed down Newbolt Street. He stared along the half-hidden course of the tracks, trying to recall if memory served. This line skirted the municipal golf course on its way back. On its way back to the west side. Ralph thought this must be the same set of defunct tracks which ran along the edge of the airport and past the picnic area where Faye Chapin might even now be brooding over the seatings in the upcoming Runway 3 Classic. It's all been one big loop, he thought. It's taken us damn near 3 days, but I think in the end, we're going to be right back where we started. Not Eden, but Harris Avenue. Say, you guys, how you doing? It was a voice Ralph almost thought he recognized, and that feeling was reinforced by his first look at the man it came from. He was standing behind them, at the point where the Newbolt Street sidewalk finally gave up the ghost. He looked 50 or so, but Ralph guessed he might actually be 5 or even 10 years younger than that. He was wearing a sweatshirt and old ragged jeans. The aura surrounding him was as green as a glass of St. Patrick's Day beer. It was finally what turned the trick for Ralph. It was the wino who had approached him and Bill on the day that he had found Bill in Stratford Park, falling over his old pal Bob Polhurst, who, as it had turned out, had outlived him. Life was funnier than Grouch and Marx sometimes. A queer sense of fatalism was creeping over Ralph, and with it, an intuitive understanding of the forces which now surrounded them. There was one he could have done without. It hardly mattered if those forces were beneficent or malign. Random or purpose. They were gigantic. That was what mattered. And they made the things Clotho and Lachesis had said about the choice and free will seem like a joke. He felt as if he and Lois were roped to the spokes of a gigantic wheel. A wheel which kept rolling them back to where they had come from, even as it took them deeper and deeper into this horrible tunnel. "You got a bit of the old spare change there, mister?" Ralph slid down a little so the wino would be sure to hear him when he talked. "Bet your uncle called you from Dexter," Ralph said. "Told you you could have your old job back at the mill, but only if you got there today. Is that about right?" Wino blinked at him in cautious surprise. "Well, yes, like that." He felt for the story one he probably believed in more fully than anyone he told it to these days, and found its tattered thread again. "It's a good job, you know, and I could have it back. There's a banger in Arustu, busted 2 o'clock, but there's 55, and so far I got only a quarter." 76 cents is what you got? Lois said. 2 quarters, 2 dimes, 1 nickel, and a penny? But considering how much you drink, your aura looks extremely healthy. I'll say that much for you. You must have the constitution of an ox. The wino gave her a puzzled look, then took a step backward and wiped his nose with the palm of his hand. "Don't worry," Ralph reassured him. "My wife sees auras everywhere. She's a very spiritual person." "Is that so now?" "Uh-huh. She's also very generous, and I think she'll do quite a bit better by you than a little spare change, won't you, Alice?" "She'll just drink it up," she said. "There's no job in Dexter." "No, probably not," Ralph said, fixing her with his eyes. "But his aura does look extremely healthy. Extremely." "You kinda got your own spiritual side, I guess," the wino said. His eyes were still shifting cautiously back and forth between Ralph and Lois, but there was a guarded flicker of hope in them. "You know, that's true," Ralph said. "And just lately it's really come to the fore." He pursed his lips as if an interesting thought had just occurred to him and inhaled. A bright green ray shot out of the panhandler's aura, crossed the 10 feet separation from him, Ralph and Lois, and entered Ralph's mouth. The taste was clear and at once identifiable. Boone's Farm apple wine. It was rough and low down, but sort of pleasant just the same. It had a working man's sparkle to it. With the taste that came, that sense of returning strength, which was good, and a sharp, edgy clarity of thought that was even better. Lois, meanwhile, was holding out a $20 bill. The wino didn't immediately see it, however. He was scaling up into the sky. At that instant, another bright green ray quilled out of his aura. It shot across the weedy clearing beside the cellar hole like a brilliant flashlight beam and into Lois's mouth and nose. The bill in her hand shook briefly. "Oh, that's so good." "Goddamn jet jockeys from Charleston Air Force Base," the wino cried disapprovingly. "They ain't supposed to be boomstown buried till they get out over the ocean. Damn near wet mine." His eye fell on the bill between Lois's fingers and his scowl deepened. "Say, what kind of joke you think you pulled here? I ain't stupid, you know. Maybe I like a drink every now and then, but don't make me stupid." "Give it time," Ralph thought. "It will." "No one thinks you're stupid," Lois said, "and it's no joke. Take the money, sir." The bum tried to hold on to a suspicious glower, but after another close look at Lois and a quick side glance at Ralph, it was overwhelmed by a large and winning smile. He stepped toward Lois, putting out his hand to take the money, which he had earned without even knowing it. Lois raised her hand just before he could close his fingers on the bill. "Just mind you, get something to eat as well as something to drink, and you might ask yourself if you're happy with the way you're living." "You're absolutely right," the wino cried enthusiastically. His eyes never left the bill between Lois's fingers. "Absolutely, ma'am. We got a program, other side of the river, detox and rehab, you know. I'm thinking about it. I really am. I think about it every damn day. His eyes were still tacked to the 20, and he was almost drooling. Lois gave Ralph a brief, doubtful look, and shrugged and let the bill pass from her fingers to his. Thanks, lady. His eyes shifted around. This lady, real princess. I just hope you know that. Ralph favored Lois with a fond glance. As a matter of fact, I do, he said. Section 5. Half an hour later, the two of them were walking between the rusty steel rails as they curved gently past the municipal golf course. Except they had drifted up a little higher above the short-time world after their meeting with a wino, perhaps because he had been a little high himself. And walking was not exactly what they were doing. There was little or no effort involved, for one thing, and although their feet were moving, to Ralph it felt more like gliding than walking. Nor was he entirely sure they were visible to the short-time world. Squirrels hopped unconcernedly about their feet, busy gathering supplies for the winter ahead. And once he saw Lois duck sharply as a ring almost parted her hair. The bird veered to the left and upward, as if realizing only at the last moment that there was a human in its flight pattern. The golfers didn't pay them any mind either. Ralph's opinion of golfers was that they were self-absorbed to the point of obsession, but he thought this lack of interest extreme even so. If he had seen a couple of neatly dressed adults strolling along a defunct GS&WM spur line in the middle of the day, he thought he might have taken a brief time out to try to guess what they were up to and where they might be going. I think I'd be especially curious about why the lady kept on muttering, "Stay where you are, darn old thing," and hitching at her skirt. Ralph thought and grinned, but the golfers didn't even spare them a glance, although a foursome bound for the ninth hole passed close enough so that Ralph could hear them worrying over a developing softness in the bond market. The idea that he and Lois had become invisible again, or at least very dim, began to seem more and more plausible to Ralph. Plausible and worrisome. Time goes faster when you're high, Old Dor had said. The trail became fresher as they went west, and Ralph liked the drips and splashes, which made it up less and less. Where the goop had fallen on the steel rails, it had eaten away the rust like corrosive acid. The weeds it had fallen on were black and dead. Even the hardiest of them had died. As Ralph and Lois passed airy munis, third green, and entered a tangle of scrawny trees and undergrowth, Lois tucked off his sleeve. She pointed ahead, large splotches of atropus, spore gleamed like sick paint on the trunks of the trees, now pressing in close to the tracks. And there were pools of it in some of the sunken dips between the old rails. Places where cross ties had once been, Ralph supposed. We're getting close to where he lives, Ralph. Yes? If he comes back and finds us in his place, what will we do? Ralph shrugged. He didn't know and wasn't sure he cared. He let the forces that were moving them around like pawns on a chessboard, the ones Mr. C and Mr. L had called the higher purpose, worry about that. If Atropus showed up, Ralph would try to yank out the little bald bugger's tongue and strangle him with it. And if that upset somebody's apple cart, goddamn bad. He couldn't take responsibility for grand plans and long-time business. His job now was to watch out for Lois, who was at risk, and try to stop the carnage that was going to occur not far from here in just a few hours. And who knew? He might even find a little extra time along the way, which he could use to try to protect his own partially rejuvenated hide. This was the stuff he had to do, and if the nasty little fuck got in Ralph's way, one of them was going down. If that didn't fit in with the big boy's plans, tough titty, said the kitty when the milk went dry. My dad used to say that a lot. Lois was picking most of this up from his aura. He could read that in her own when she touched his arm when he turned to look at her. What does that mean, Ralph? That you'll try to kill him if he gets in our way? He considered this and nodded. Yeah, that's exactly what it means. She thought about it, then nodded. Ralph? He looked at her, eyebrows raised. If it needs to be done, I'll help you do it. He was absurdly touched by this, and it pains to hide the rest of his thinking from her. The only reason she was still with him at all was so that he could keep a protective eye on her. That thought led him back toward her earrings, but he pushed the image of them away, not wanting her to see or even suspect them in his aura. Lois's thoughts, meanwhile, had gone in a different, marginally safer direction. Even if we get in and out without meeting him, he'll know someone was there, won't he? He'll probably know who it was, too. Ralph couldn't deny it, but didn't see that it mattered much. Their options had been narrowed to just this one, at least temporarily. They would take it a step at a time and just keep hoping that when the sun came up tomorrow morning, they would be around to see it. Although, given a choice, they'd probably opt to sleep in, Ralph thought, and a small wistful grin touched the corners of his mouth. God, it feels like years since I slept. His mind flashed from there to Carolyn's favorite saying. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, when I say, "That's not fair, Daddy," he said, "Tough Titty," said a kitty when the milk went dry. Yep. Okay, so Carolyn's favorite saying, the one about how it was a long walk back to Eden. It seemed to him right now that Eden might simply be sleeping until noon, or maybe a little past. He took Lois's hand and they started forward along Octopus's trail again. Section 6. 40 feet east of the cyclone fence, marking the edge of the airport, the rusty trucks petered out. Octopus's trail pushed on, however, although not for long. Ralph was quite sure he could see the spot where it ended, and the image of the two of them roped to the spokes of a big wheel reoccurred. He was right. Octopus's den was only a stone's throw from where Ed had run into the fat man with the barrels of fertilizer in the back of his pickup truck. The wind gusted, bringing them a sick, rotten smell from close by, and from a little further away, the voice of Faye Chapin, haranguing someone on his favorite subject. What I always say, Mahjong is like chess, chess is like life, so if you can play either of those games. The wind dropped again. Ralph could still hear Faye's voice if he strained his ears, but he had lost the individual words. That was alright, though. He had heard the lecture often enough to know pretty much how it went. Ralph, that stinks awful. It's him, isn't it? He nodded, but didn't think Lois saw him. She held his hand tightly in hers, looking straight ahead with wide eyes. The splotchy track, which had begun at the doors of the Civic Center, ended at the base of a drunkenly leaning dead oak tree, with 200 feet away. The cause of both the tree's death and its final leaning position was clear. One side of the venerable relic had been killed like a banana by a glancing stroke of lightning. The cracks and the crenulations and bulges of its gray dark seemed to make the shapes of half-buried, silently screaming faces. And the tree spread its nude branches against the sky like grim ideograms, or is it ideograms? Ones which bore, at least in Ralph's imagination, an uncomfortable resemblance to the Japanese ideograms which meant kamikaze. The bullet which had killed the tree hadn't succeeded in knocking it over, but it had certainly done its best. Part of its extensive root system, which faced the airport, had been yanked right out of the ground. These roots had extended beneath the chain-link fence and pulled a section of it upward and outward in a bell shape that made Ralph think, for the first time in years, of a childhood acquaintance named Charles Ingstrom. "Don't you play with Chucky?" Ralph's mother used to tell him. He's a dirty boy. Ralph didn't know if Chucky was a dirty boy or not, but he was fruit crackers, no question about that. Chucky Engstrom liked to hide behind the tree in his front yard with a long tree branch which he called his tiki wand. When a woman in a full skirt passed, Chucky would tiptoe after her, extending the tiki wand under the hem and then lifting. Quite often, he got to check out the color of the woman's underwear. The color of Lady's underwear held great fascination for Chucky. Before she realized what was going on and chased the wildly cackling lad to his house, threatening to tell his mother. The airport fence pulled out and up where the old folks raced. Reminded Ralph of the way the skirts of Chucky's victims had looked when he started to raise them with the tiki wand. Ralph? He looked at her. Who's Piggy One? And why are you thinking about him now? Ralph burst out laughing. Did you see that in my aura? Well, I guess so. I don't really know anymore. Who is he? Tell you another time, come on. He took her hand and they walked slowly toward the oak tree, where Atropus's trail ended into the thickening odor of wild decay. That was his scent. Sounds delightful, doesn't it? I guess we can go to our second music break since we're at chapter 25 now. And on this break, of course, we have the lovely and talented Miss Mia Savage with her group Antidote for Savages from Phoenix, Arizona, sometimes here in the Four Corners of Colorado, with Bury Me in Heaven, Not a Phase, Sing to Your Grave, and The Bottom Line. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this music break.
no job, no savings or money. Just a choice right now between fear and love. Choice right now between fear and love.
Welcome back, sports fans. Man, the music isn't even registering. Why not? I'll turn it up a bit. Oh, it's barely there. Turn it up a bit more. And we're off to the races. But first, let me take a selfie. Alright, so we're about to get back into Stephen King's Insomnia. It's been quite trippy, I must say. Yeah, we're here at Chapter 5, Section 1. Let's see what's going on. Let me just quadruple check that my sound is good. Testes, testes. 1, 2, 3. Alright. Ready? Want to talk about it like a kid? Here we go. They stood at the base of the oak, looking down. Lois was gnawing obsessively on her lower lip. Do we have to go down there, Ralph? Do we really? Yes. But why? What are we supposed to do? Take something he stole? Kill him? What? Lightning had acted like a strong hand, shoving the tree violently toward the east and opening a large hole at the bottom on its western side. To a man or woman with short-time vision, that hole would undoubtedly look dark and maybe a little scary, with its crumbly sides and barely glimpsed roots, squirming in the deep shadows like snakes, but otherwise not very unusual. A kid with a good imagination might see more, Ralph thought. That dark space at the bottom of the tree might make him think of pirate treasure, outlaw hideouts, troll holes. But Ralph didn't think even an imaginative short-time kid would have been able to see the dim red glow filtering up from beneath the tree, or realize that those squirming roots were actually rough rungs leading down to some unknown and undoubtedly unpleasant place. No. Even an imaginative kid wouldn't see those things, but he or she might sense them. Right, and after doing so, one with any brains would turn and run as if all the demons of hell were in hot pursuit, as would he and Lois, if they had any sense at all. Except for Lois's earrings. Except for Joe Weiser's comb. Except for his own lost place in the purpose. And of course, except for Helen and possibly Nat, and the 2,000 other people who were going to be at the Civic Center tonight, Lois was right. They were supposed to do something, and if they backed out now, it was a something that would remain forever done, undone. And those are the ropes, he thought. The ropes, the powers that be used to tie us poor, muddled, short-time creatures to their wheel. He now visualized Clotho and the Jessies through a bright lens of hate, and he thought that if the two of them had been here right now, they would have exchanged one of their uneasy looks and then taken a quick step or two away. And they would be right to do that, he thought, very right. Ralph, what's wrong? Why are you so angry? He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. It's nothing. Come on, let's go before we lose our nerve. She looked at him a moment longer than nodded, and Ralph sat down and poked his legs into the gaping, root-lined mouth at the foot of the tree that she was right beside. Section 2. Ralph slid beneath a tree on his back, holding his furry hand over his face to keep dirt from crumbling into his open eyes. He tried not to flinch, as root knuckles caressed the side of his neck and prodded the small of his back. The smell under the tree was revolting. A monkey house aroma that made his gorge rise. He was able to go on, kidding himself that he would get used to it until he was all the way into the hole under the oak, and then the kidding stopped. He raised himself on one elbow, feeling smaller roots digging at his scalp and dangling flaps of bark tickling his cheeks, and ejected as much of his breakfast as still remained in the holding tank. Yeah. He could hear Lois doing the same thing on his left. A terrible, woozy faintness went rolling through his head like a breaking wave. The stench was so thick, it was almost eating it. When he could see the red stuff they had followed to this nightmare place under the tree all over his hands and arms. Just looking at this stuff had been bad. Now he found himself taking a bath in it, for God's sake. Something groped for his hand and he almost gave in to panic before realizing it was Lois. He laced his fingers through hers. Ralph, come up a little bit. It's better. You can breathe. He understood that what she meant at once and had to restrain himself, pull himself down at the last moment. If he hadn't, he would have shot up the ladder of perception like a rocket under full thrust. The world wavered, and suddenly there seemed to be a little more light in this stinking hole. And a little more room, too. The smell didn't go away, but it became bearable. Kind of think they just got used to it. Let me turn this down a little bit. It's getting more aggressive. Come on, man. Alright. And that was like being in a small closed tent full of people with dirty feet and sweaty armpits. Not nice, but something you could live with, at least for a while. Ralph suddenly imagined the face of a pocket watch, complete with hands that were moving too fast. It was better without the stench trying to pour down his throat and gag him, but this was still a dangerous place to be. Suppose they came out of here tomorrow morning with nothing left of the Civic Center but a smoking hole on Main Street. And it could happen. Keeping track of time down here, short time, long time, or all time, was impossible. Glanced at his watch, but it was meaningless. He could have said it earlier, but he had forgotten. Let it go, Ralph. You can't do anything about it, so let it go. He tried, and as he did, it occurred to him that Old Door had been 100% correct on the day Ed had crashed into Mr. Westside Gardener's pickup truck. It was better not to mess up the long-time business. And yet, here they were. The world's oldest Peter Bourne and world's oldest Wendy sliding under a magic tree into some slimy underworld neither one of them wanted to see. Lois was looking at him, her pale face lit with that sick red glow, her expressive eyes full of fright. He saw dark threads on her chin and realized it was blood. She had quit just nibbling at her lower lip and had begun taking bites out of it. "Ralph, are you all right? You get to crawl under an old oak tree with a pretty girl and you even have to ask?" "I'm fine, Lois, but I think we'd better hurry." "All right." He felt around below him and placed his foot on a gnarled root knuckle. It took his weight and he slid down the stony slope, squeezing beneath another root and holding Lois around the waist. Her skirt skidded up to her thighs, and Ralph thought again, briefly, about Chucky Ingstrom and his peaky wand. He was both amused and exasperated to see Lois was trying to pull her skirt back down. You know that a lady tries to keep her skirt down whenever possible, but I think the rule goes by the boards when you're sliding down troll staircases under old oak trees, okay? She gave him an embarrassed, frightening little smile. "If I'd known what we were going to be doing, I would have worn slacks, but I thought we were just going to the hospital." If I'd known what we were going to be doing, Ralph thought, I would have cashed in my bonds, developing softness in the market or not, and put us on a plane to Rio, my dear. He felt around with his other foot, very aware that if he fell, he was probably going to end up in a place far beyond the reach of dairy rescue. Just above his eyes, a reddish worm poked out of the earth, dribbling little crumbles of dirt down on Ralph's forehead. For what seemed like an eternity, he felt nothing. And then his foot found smooth wood. Not a root this time, but something like a real step. He slid down, still holding Lois around the waist and waiting to see if the thing he was standing on would hold or snap under their combined weight. It held, and it was wide enough for both of them. Ralph looked down and saw that it was the top step of a narrow staircase which curved down into the red-tinged dark. It had been built for, and perhaps by, a creature that was a lot shorter than they were, making it necessary for them to hunch. But it was still better than the nightmare of the last few moments. Ralph looked at the ragged wedge of daylight above them, his eyes gazing out of his dirt and sweat-streaked face with an expression of dumb longing. Daylight had never looked so sweet or so distant. He turned back to Lois and nodded to her. She squeezed his hand and nodded back. Bending over, cringing each time a dangling root touched their necks or backs, they started down the staircase. Section 3. The ascent seemed endless, and the red light grew brighter. The stench of atropos grew thicker, and Ralph was aware that they were both going up as they went down. It was either that or be flattened by the smell. He continued telling himself that they were going and doing what they had to do, and that there must be a timekeeper on an operation this big, someone who would give them a poke if and when the schedule got too tight for comfort. But he kept worrying just the same, because there might not be a timekeeper or an or a team of refs in zebra-striped shirts. All bets are off, Lodo had said. Just as Ralph was starting to wonder if the stairs went all the way down into hell itself, it ended. A short stone-lined corridor, no more than 40 inches high and 20 feet long, led to an arched doorway. Beyond it, the red glow pulsed and flared like the reflected glow of an open oven. "Come on, Lois. But be ready for anything. Be ready for him." She nodded, hitched at her wayward slip again, then walked beside him up the narrow passage. Ralph kicked something that wasn't a stone and bent over to pick it up. It was a red plastic cylinder, wider at one end than the other. After a moment, he realized what it was. It was a jump rope handle. 369, hun, the goose drank wine. Don't butt into what doesn't concern you, short time, Atropus had said, but he had butted in, and not just because of what the little gold doctors called "saw" either. He had gotten involved because what Atropus was up to was his concern. Whatever the little creep might think, to the contrary, Derry was his town, Rose Chase was his friend, and Ralph found within himself a sincere desire to make Ralph number 3 sorry he'd ever seen Lois's diamond earrings. He flipped the jump rope handle away and started to walk again. A moment later, he and Lois passed under the arch and simply stood there, staring into Atropus's underground apartment. With their wide eyes and linked hands, they looked more like children in a fairy tale than ever. Not Peter Pan and Wendy now, but Hansel and Gretel, coming upon the witch's candy house after days spent wandering in the trackless forest. Section 4. Oh, Ralph. Oh my god, Ralph. Do you see? Lois. Directly ahead of them was a small moon chamber which seemed to be a combination kitchen and bedroom. The room was simultaneously sordid and creepy. Standing in the center was a low, round table which Ralph thought was the amputated top half of a barrel. The remains of a meal, some gray rancid gruel that looked like liquefied brains congealing in a chipped soup tureen, stood on it. There was a single dirty folding chair. To the right of the table was a primitive commode which consisted of a rusty steel drum with a toilet seat balanced on top of it. The smell rising from this was incredibly foul. The room's only decoration was a full-length brass-board mirror on one wall. Its reflective surface so age-darkened that Ralph and Lois, captured within it, looked as if they might have been floating in 10 or 12 feet of water. To the left of the mirror was a stark sleeping accommodation which consisted of a filthy mattress and a burlap sack stuffed with straw or feathers. Both pillow and mattress bellowed and raved with the night sweats of the creature who used them. Dreams inside that burlap pillow would drive me insane, Ralph thought. Somewhere, God only knew how much further under earth, water was dripping hollowly. On the far side of the apartment was another higher arc through which they could see a jumbled cereal storage area. Ralph actually blinked 2 or 3 times to try to make sure he was seeing what he thought he was seeing. This is the place, all right, he thought. Whatever we came to find, it's here. Lois began to drift toward the second arch, as if hypnotized. Her mouth was quivering with dismay, but her eyes were full of helpless curiosity. It was the expression, he was quite sure, that must have been on the face of Bluebeard's wife, when she had used the key which unlocked the door to her husband's forbidden room. Ralph was suddenly sure that Octopus was lurking just inside that arch, with his rusty scalpel poised. He hurried after Lois and stopped her just before she could step through. He grasped her upper arm, then put a finger to his lips and shook his head at her before she could speak. He hunkered down with the fingers of one hand tinted on the packed dirt floor. Looking like a sprinter awaiting the crack of the starter's gun, then he launched himself through the arch, relishing the eager response of his body even at this moment. Hitting on his shoulder and rolling. His feet struck a cardboard box and knocked it over, spilling out a jumble of stuff, mismatched gloves and socks, a couple of old paperbacks, a pair of Bermuda shorts, a screwdriver with smears of maroon stuff, maybe paint, maybe blood, on its steel shaft. Ralph got to his knees, looking back toward Lois, who was standing in the doorway and staring at him with her hands clasped under her chin. There was no one on either side of the archway, and really, no room for anyone. More boxes were stacked on either side. Ralph read the printing on them with a kind of bemused wonder. Jack Daniels, Gilby's, Smirnoff, J&B. Atropus, it seemed, was as fond of liquor cartons as anyone else who couldn't bear to throw anything away. Ralph? Was it safe? The word was a joke, but he nodded his head and held out his hand, and she hurried toward him, giving her slip another sharp upward yank, and as she came and looked about herself in a growing amazement. Standing on the other side of the arch, in Atropus's grim little apartment, the storage area had looked large. Now that they were actually in it, Ralph saw it went well beyond that. Rooms this big were usually called warehouses. Aisles wandered among great, tottery piles of junk. Only the stuff by the door had actually been boxed. The rest had been piled any which way, creating something which was 2 parts maze and 3 parts booby trap. Ralph decided that even warehouse was too small a word. This was an underground suburb, and Atropus might be lurking anywhere within it. And if he was here, he was probably watching them. Lois didn't ask what they were looking at. He saw by her face that she already knew. When she did speak, it was in a dreamy tone that sent a chill scampering up Ralph's back. You must be so very old, Ralph. Yes, so very old. 20 yards into the room, which was lit with the same sunken, sourceless red glow as the stairway, Ralph could see a large spoke wheel lying atop a cane-backed chair, which was, in turn, standing on top of a splintery old clothes press. Looking at that wheel brought a deeper chill. It was as if the metaphor his mind had seized to help grasp the concept of saw would become real. Then he noted the rusty iron strip which circled the wheel's outer circumference and realized it had probably come from one of those gay 90s bikes that looked like overgrown tricycles. It's a bicycle wheel, all right, and it's 100 years old if it's a day, he thought. It led him to wonder how many people, how many thousands or tens of thousands had died in and around Derry since Atropus had somehow transported this wheel down here. And of those thousands, how many had been random deaths? And how far back does it go? How many hundreds of years? No way of telling, of course. Maybe all the way to the beginning. Whenever or however that had been. And during that time, he had taken a little something from everyone he had fucked with. And here it all was. Here it all was. Ralph! He looked around and saw that Lois was holding out both hands. One was a Panama hat with a crescent bitten from the brim, and the other was a black nylon pocket comb, the kind you could buy in any convenience store for $1.29. Ghostly glimmer of orange yellow still clung to it, which didn't surprise Ralph much. Each time the comb's owner had used it, it must have picked up a little of that glow from both his aura and his balloon string like dandruff. It also didn't surprise him that the comb should have been with McGovern's hat. The last time he'd seen those two things, they'd been together. He remembered Atropos' sarcastic grin as he swept the Panama from his head and pretended to use the comb on his own bald dome. And then he jumped up and clicked his heels together. Lois was pointing at an old rocking chair with a broken runner. That cat was right there on the seat. Comb was underneath it. Mr. Weiser's, isn't it? Yes. She held it out to him immediately. You take it. I'm not as ditzy as Bill always thought, but sometimes I lose things, and if I lost this, I'd never forgive myself. He took the comb, started to put it into his back pocket, then thought how easily Atropus had plucked it from the same location. Easy as falling off a log, it had been. He put it into his front pants pocket instead, then looked back at Lois, who was gazing at McGovern's bitten hat with a sad wonder of Hamlet looking at the skull of his old pal Yorick. When she looked up, Ralph saw tears in her eyes. He loved this hat. He thought it looked very dashing and debonair when he had it on. He just looked like Bill. But he thought he looked good, and that's important. Wouldn't you say so, Ralph? Yes. Past They got back into the seat of the old rocker and turned to examine a box of what looked like rummage sale clothes. As soon as her back was to him, Ralph squatted down, peering beneath a chair, hoping to see a splintered double gleam in the darkness. If Bill's hat and Joe's comb were both here, then maybe Lois's earrings? There was nothing beneath the rocker but dust and an ink-knitted baby bootie. Should have known that it'd be too easy, Ralph thought, getting to his feet again. He suddenly felt exhausted. They had found Joe's comb with no trouble at all, and that was good, absolutely great, but Ralph was afraid it had also been a spectacular case of beginner's luck. They still had Lois's earrings to worry about and doing whatever else it was they had been sent here to do, of course. And what was that? He didn't know, and if someone from upstairs was sending instructions, he wasn't receiving them. Lois, do you have any idea what is it? Lois, is it him? No, be quiet, Ralph. Be quiet and listen. He listened at first. He heard nothing, and then the clenching sensation, the blink, came inside his head again. This time it was very slow, very cautious. He slipped upward a little further, as lightly as a feather lifted in a draft of warm air. He became aware of a long, low, groaning sound. Like an endlessly creaking door, there was something familiar about it. Not in the sound itself, but in its associations. It was like a burglar alarm or maybe a smoke detector. It's telling us where it is. It's calling us. Lois seized his hand with fingers that were as cold as ice. That's it, Ralph. That's what we're looking for. Do you hear it? Yes, of course he did, but whatever that sound was, it had nothing to do with Lois's earrings. And without Lois's earrings, he wasn't leaving this place. Come on, Ralph, come on, we have to find it. He let her lead him deeper into the room. Octopus's souvenirs were piled at least 3 feet higher than their heads in most places. How a shrimp like him had managed this trick, Ralph didn't know. Levitation, maybe? But the result was that he quickly lost all sense of direction as they twisted, turned, and occasionally seemed to double back. All he knew for sure was that the low groaning sound kept getting louder in his ears. As they began to draw near its source, it became an insectile buzzing which Ralph found increasingly unpleasant. He kept expecting to round a corner and find a giant locust staring at him with dull brownish black eyes as big as grapefruit. Although the separate auras of the objects, which filled the storage vault, had faded like the scent of flower petals pressed between the pages of a book, they were still there beneath Atropus's stench, and at this level of perception, with all their senses exquisitely awake and attuned, it was impossible not to sense those auras and be affected by them. These mute reminders of the random dead were both terrible and pathetic. The place was more than a museum or a pack rat's lair, Ralph realized. It was a profane church where Atropus took his own version of communion. 3 for bread, tears for wine. Their stumbling course through the narrow zigzag rows was a gruesome, almost shattering experience. Each not quite aimless turn presented 100 more objects. Ralph wished he had never seen and would not even have to remember. Each voiced its own small cry of pain and bewilderment. He did not have to wonder if Lois shared his feelings. She was sobbing steadily and quietly beside him. Here was a child, battered flexible flyer sled, with a knotted tow rope still draped over the steering bar. The boy to whom it had belonged had died of convulsions on a crisp January day in 1953. Here was a majorette's baton with its shaft wrapped in purple and white spirals of crepe, the colors of Grant Academy. She had been raped and bludgeoned to death with a rock in the fall of 1967. Her killer, who had never been caught, had stuffed her body into a small cave where her bones, along with the bones of 2 other unlucky victims, still lay. Here was the cameo book of a woman who had been struck by a falling brick while walking down Main Street to buy the new issue of Vogue. If she had left her home 30 seconds earlier or later, she would have been fine. Here was the buck knife of a man who had been killed in a hunting accident in 1937. Here was the compass of a Boy Scout who had fallen and broken his neck while hiking on Mount Katahdin. The sneaker of a little boy named Gage Creed, run down by a speeding tanker truck on Route 15 in Ludlow. Rings and magazines, keychains and umbrellas, hats and glasses, rattles and radios. They looked like different things, but Ralph thought they were really all the same thing. The faint, soaring voices of people who had found themselves written out of the script in the middle of the second act while they were still learning their lines for the third. People who had been unceremoniously hauled off before their work was done or their obligations fulfilled. People whose only crime had been to be born in the random and to have caught the eye of the madman with the rusty scalpel. Mo was sobbing, "I hate him! I hate him so much!" She knew what she meant. It was one thing to hear Clotho and Chessie say that Atropos was also part of the big picture, that he might even serve some higher purpose himself, and quite another to see the faded Boston Bruins cap of a little boy who had fallen into an overgrown cellar hole and died in the dark, died in agony, died with no voice left after 6 hours spent screaming for his mother. Ralph reached out and briefly touched the cap. Its owner's name had been Billy Weatherby. His final thought had been of ice cream. Ralph's hand tightened over Lois's. "Ralph, what is it? I can hear you thinking, I'm sure I can, but it's like listening to somebody whisper under his breath." "I was thinking that I want to bust that little bastard's chops for him, Lois. Maybe we could teach him what it's like to lie awake at night. What do you think?" Her grip on his hand tightened, and she nodded. Section 5. They reached a place where the narrow corridor they'd been following branched into diverging paths. A low, steady buzz was coming from the left-hand one, and not very far up it, either by sound. It was not impossible for them to walk side by side, and as they worked their way toward the end, the passage grew narrower. Ralph was finally obliged to begin signaling along. The reddish exit Atropos had left behind was very thick here, dripping down the jumbled stacks of souvenirs and making little puddles on the dirt floor. Lois was holding his hand with painful tightness now, but Ralph didn't complain. "It's like the Civic Center, Ralph. He spends a lot of time here." Ralph nodded. The question was, what did Mr. A come down this aisle to commune with? They were coming to the end now. It was blocked by a solid wall of junk, and he still couldn't see what was making that buzzing sound. It was now starting to drive him crazy. It was like having a horsefly trapped in the middle of your head. As they approached the end of the passage, he became more and more sure that what they were looking for was on the other side of the wall of junk which blocked it. They would either have to retrace their steps and try to find a way around or break through. Either choice might consume more time than they could afford. Ralph felt nibbles of desperation at the back of his mind. But the corridor did not end. On the left, there was a crawl space beneath a dining room table piled high with dishes and stacks of green paper and... Green paper? No, not quite. Stacks of bills. 10s, 20s, and 50s were piled up in a random profusion on the dishes. There was a choke of hundreds and cracked gravy boat and a rolled up $500 bill looking drunkenly out of a dusty wineglass. Ralph, my God, it's a fortune! She wasn't looking at the table, but at the other wall of the passageway. At least 5 feet had been constructed of banded gray-green bricks of currency. They were in an alleyway which was literally made of money. when Ralph realized he could now answer another of the questions that had been troubling him, where Ed had been getting his dough. Atropus was rolling in it, but Ralph had an idea that the little bald-headed son of a bitch still had trouble giving takes. He bent down a little to get a better look into the crawl space underneath the table. There appeared to be yet another chamber on the other side, this one very small. A slow red glow waxed and waned in there like the beating of a heart. It cast uneasy pulses of light on their shoes. Ralph then pointed, then looked at Lois. He nodded, she nodded. He dropped to his knees and crawled beneath the money-laden table and into the shrine Atropus had created around the thing which lay in the middle of the floor. It was what they had been sent to find. He hadn't a single doubt about it, but he still had no idea what it was. The object, not much bigger than the sort of marbles children call croakers, was wrapped in a death bag, as impenetrable as the center of a black hole. Oh, great. Well, lovely. Now what? Ralph, do you hear singing? It's very faint. He looked at her dubiously, then glanced around. He had already come to hate his cramped space, and although he was not claustrophobic by nature, he now felt panicky desire to get away, squeezing into his thoughts. A very distinct voice spoke up in his head. It's not just what I want, Ralph. It's what I need. I'll do my best to hang in with you, but if you don't finish whatever the hell it is you're supposed to be doing in here soon, it won't make any difference what either of us want. I'm just going to take over and run like hell. The controlled terror in that voice didn't surprise him, because this really was a horrible place. Not a room at all, but the bottom of a deep shaft whose circular walls were constructed of rickrack and stolen goods. Posters, footstools, clock radios, cameras, books, crates, shoes, rakes. Dangling almost right in front of Ralph's eyes was a battered saxophone on a frayed strap with the word Jake printed on it in dust-filled rhinestones. Ralph reached out to grab it, wanting to get the damn thing out of his face. Then he imagined the removal of this one object, starting a landslide that would bring the walls down on them, bury them alive. He pulled his hand back at the same time he opened his mind and senses as fully as he could. For a moment he thought he did hear something. A faint sigh like the whisper of the ocean in a seashell, but then it was gone. If there are voices in here, I can hear them, Lois. That damn thing is drowning them out. He pointed at the object in the middle of the circle. Black beyond any previously held conception of black. Death bag, which was the hypothesis of all death bags, but Lois was shaking her head. No, not drowning them out, sucking them dry. She looked at the screaming black thing with horror and loathing. That thing is sucking the life out of all this stuff piled up around it, and it's trying to suck the life out of us too. Yes, of course it was. Now that Lois had actually said it out loud, Ralph could feel the death bag, or the object inside it, pulling at something far down in his head, yanking at it, twisting at it, shoving at it, trying to pull it out like a tooth from its pink socket of gum. Trying to suck the life out of them? Close, but no cigar. Ralph didn't think it was their lives the thing inside the death bag wanted, nor their souls. At least, not exactly. It was their life force it wanted. Their paw. Lois's eyes widened as she picked up this thought, and then they shifted to a place just beyond his right shoulder. She leaned forward on her knees and reached out. Lois, I won't do that. You could bring the whole place down around our... Too late. He yanked something free, looking at it with horrified understanding, then held it out to him. It's still alive. Everything that's in here is still alive. I don't know how that can be, but it is. Somehow it is, but the thing... Why are they so faint? What she was holding out to him was a small, white sneaker that belonged to a woman or a child. As Ralph took it, he heard it singing softly in a distant voice. The sound was as lonely as November wind on an overcast afternoon, but incredibly sweet as well, an antidote to the endless spray of the black thing on the floor. And it was a voice he knew. He was sure of it. There was a maroon splatter on the sneaker's toe. Ralph at first thought it was chocolate milk, then recognized it for what it really was, dried blood. In that instant, he was outside the Red Apple again, grabbing Nat before Helen could drop her. He remembered how Helen's feet had tangled together, how she had stumbled backward, leaning against the Red Apple's door like a drunk against a lamppost. Holding out her hands to him. "Gimme my baby, gimme my..." He knew the voice because it was Helen's voice. His sneaker had been on her foot that day, and the drops of blood on the toe had come either from Helen's smashed nose or from Helen's lacerated cheek. It sang and sang its voice, not quite buried beneath the buzz of the thing in the death bag, and now that Ralph's ears, or whatever passed for Ralph's ears in the world of auras, were all the way open. He could hear all the other voices of all the other objects. They sang like a lost choir. Alive, singing. They could sing. All the things lining these walls could sing because their owners still sing. Their owners were still alive. Ralph looked up again, this time noting that while some of the objects he saw were old, the battered alto sax, for instance, a great many of them were new. There were no wheels from K9's bicycles in this little alcove. He saw 3 clock radios, all of them digital, a shaving kit that looked as if it had hardly been used, a lipstick that still had a Rite Aid price tag on it. Lois, Octopus has taken the stuff from the people who will be at the Civic Center tonight, hasn't he? Yes, I'm sure that's right. He pointed at the black cocoon, creaking on the floor, almost drowning out the songs all around it, drowning them out as it fed on them. Whatever's inside that death bag has something to do with what Clotho in the chassis called the master cord. It's the thing that ties all these different objects, all these different lives together. That makes them a set, yes? Ralph handed the sneaker back to Lois. This goes with us when we go. It's Helen's. I know. Lois looked at it for a moment, then did something Ralph thought extremely clever. Pulled out 2 eyelets worth of lacing and tied the sneaker to her left wrist like a bracelet. Crawled closer to the small death bag, then bent over it. Getting close was hard, and staying close was harder. It was like placing your ear next to the motor housing of a power drill, shrieking at full volume, or looking into a bright light without squinting. This time there seemed to be actual words buried within the buzzing, the same ones they'd heard as they approached the edge of the death bag around the Civic Center. Get out. Cough. Beat it. Ralph placed his hands over his ears for a moment, but of course, that did no good. The sounds weren't coming from outside, not really. He let his hands drop again and looked at Lois. What do you think? Any ideas on what we should do next? He didn't know exactly what he had expected of her, but it wasn't the quick positive response he got. Let it open and take out what's inside and do it right away. Thing's dangerous. Also, it might be calling Atropus. Have you thought of that? Stolen just like the hen tattled on Jack in the story about the magic beanstalk. Ralph actually had considered this possibility, although not in such vivid terms. All right, he thought, but open the bag, take the prize. It's just how are we supposed to do that? He remembered the bolt of lightning he'd sent at Atropus when the little bald creep had been trying to lure Rosalie across the street. A good trick, but something like that might do more harm than good here. What if he vaporized the thing they were supposed to take? I don't think you can do that. Alright, fair enough. As a matter of fact, he didn't think he could do it either. But when you were surrounded by the possessions of people who could all be dead, when the sun came up tomorrow, taking chances seemed like a very bad idea. An insane idea. What I need isn't lightning, but a nice sharp pair of scissors, like the ones Clotho and the chassis used to. He stared at Lois, startled by the clarity of the image. I don't know what you just thought of, but hurry up and do it, whatever it is. Section 6. Ralph looked down at his right hand, a hand from which the wrinkles and the first twist of arthritis had now disappeared, a hand which lay inside a bright blue corona of light. Feeling a little foolish, he folded his last two fingers against his palm and extended the first two, thinking of a game they played as kids. Rock, brick, scissors, scissors cut paper, paper covers rock. These scissors, he thought. I need a pair of scissors. Help me out. Nothing. He glanced at Lois and saw her looking at him with serene calm, which was somehow terrifying. Oh, Lois, if you only knew, he thought, and then swept that out of his mind because he had felt something, hadn't he? Yes, something. This time he didn't make words in his mind but a picture, not the scissors Clotho had used to send on Jimmy B, but the stainless steel shears from his mother's sewing basket. Long, slim blades, tapering to a point almost as sharp as the tip of a knife. As he deepened his concentration, he could even see the two tiny words engraved on the metal just south of the pivot point. Sheffield Steel. And now he could feel that thing in his mind again, not a blink this time, but a muscle. An immensely powerful one, slowly flexing. He looked fixedly down at his fingers and made the shears in his mind open and close. As they did, he slowly opened and closed his fingers, creating a V that widened and narrowed. Now he could feel the energy he had taken from Nirvana Boy and the bum out at the train yards, just gathering in his head, then moving down his right arm to his fingers like a cramp. The aura surrounding the extended first and second fingers of his right hand began to thicken and to lengthen, to take on the slim shape of blades. Ralph waited until they had extended themselves about 5 inches out from his nails and then worked his fingers back and forth again. Blades opened and closed. Oh, Ralph, do it! Yes, he couldn't afford to wait around and run experiments. He felt like a car battery that had been called on to crank a motor much too big for it. He could feel all his energy and stuff he'd taken as well as his own, running down his right arm and into those blades. It wouldn't last long. He leaned forward, fingers pressed together in a pointing gesture, and sank the tip of the scissors into the deathbed. He had been concentrating so hard on first creating and then maintaining the scissors that he had stopped hearing that steady, hoarse buzz. At least with his conscious mind, but when the scissors' point sank into its black skin, the deathbed suddenly cycled up to a new, shrieking pitch of mingled pain and alarm. Ralph saw dribbles of thick, dark goo running out of the bag and across the floor. It looked like diseased knot. At the same time, he felt the power drain inside him roughly double. He could see it. He realized his own aura running down his arm and across the back of his hand in slow, peristaltic waves, and he could sense it dimming around the rest of his body, as its essential protection of him thinned out. Hurry, Ralph, hurry! He made a tremendous effort and tore his fingers open. The shimmering blue blades also opened, making a small slit in the black egg. It screamed and two bright, jagged flashes of red light raced across its surface. Ralph brought his fingers together and watched the shears growing, run their tips, snag shut, cutting through the dense black stuff that was part shell and part flesh. He cried out. It was not pain he felt exactly, but a sense of awful weariness. This is what bleeding to death must feel like, he thought. Well, we're not exactly at a chapter or a section, but boys and girls, it is time for us to mosey on out of here shortly. We have about 2 minutes and 50 seconds and counting. I just want to thank you guys for hanging out with me tonight on We Are Paradox Media's Late Night in the Rockies. Thank you to all of our friends on We Are Paradox Media's Facebook, JPNL Radio, Twitter, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Twitch, YouTube, wherever else you may be listening. Beyond the Omniverse tonight. Have a wonderful time this evening, and I can't wait to do it again next weekend. I want to see what we're going to do, but I'm not quite sure because we have things in the works, so I don't want to spill the beans just yet because they might not be right. Renegades, don't forget, you guys, we're all in this together. Together, we can make the world a bit better. And together, my friends, we are Paradox Media because without you, there is no us. Until next time, night, love and light. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend and an awesome beginning to your week. Don't work too hard, don't take life too seriously, and I will see you back here, same crazy time, same crazy place. Don't forget, love wins always.